For years he believed discipline defined a person's worth. To him, lateness was a sign of weakness, something he would never tolerate, especially from the black maid who worked in his home. She was quiet, humble, and his little boy's closest companion. Yet in his eyes she was still just an employee who had broken the rule he valued most. With cold judgment he fired her, but as she walked away, something inside him twisted. He followed her into the night, determined to expose what he assumed was carelessness. What he uncovered instead was beyond anything he could have imagined. An unthinkable truth that would shatter his pride and reveal his prejudice. The man lived by order, routine, and precision. In his world, success wasn't luck, but discipline, and he demanded the same from everyone around him. His home was grand, a reflection of his achievements with marble floors that gleamed and a silence that carried the weight of his authority. Within those walls worked a maid who had been part of the household for years. She was older, gentle, and carried herself with quiet dignity despite her worn clothes and tired shoes. To the young boy of the house, she was more than just help. She was comfort on lonely nights, a listener to his endless stories, the one who cleaned scraped knees and filled empty rooms with laughter. He trusted her more than anyone else in the house. She was his safe place, his anchor. But to the man, she was simply an employee. Respectful, hard-working, yes, but still bound by the rules he valued above all else. And lately, she had broken the one he considered unshakable: punctuality. She had begun arriving late, and though her apologies were quiet and her eyes heavy with exhaustion, he refused to hear excuses. In his mind, lateness was laziness, and laziness was failure. He gave her warnings, but they were met with silence. The boy's pleas for understanding fell on deaf ears. Finally, with a coldness that chilled the household, the man told her to leave. The boy cried, clinging to her hand as if letting go meant losing more than a caretaker. She knelt, whispered something only he could hear, and walked away with her head held high. Yet, as the door closed behind her, the man felt an unease he couldn't explain. Something about the way she left, quiet, steady, almost secretive, gnawed at him, and that unease would soon drive him to do something he had never done before. That night, after dismissing the maid, the man tried to return to his usual order: the polished desk, the neat stack of papers, the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock. But his mind wandered. The boy had barely touched his dinner, eyes red from tears, his voice breaking as he begged for her return. The image of her walking away, shoulders straight despite the weight she clearly carried, lingered like a shadow he couldn't shake. For years he had told himself that discipline mattered more than compassion. Yet now he found himself questioning why she had risked everything for something as simple as being late. Could it really be laziness? Or was there something he didn't understand? Pride told him to forget her, but unease whispered otherwise. The next morning, before the sun fully rose, he saw her again, walking quickly down the street, head bowed, clutching a worn bag to her side. She no longer worked for him, yet she moved with a determination that piqued his curiosity. Against his own logic, he followed at a distance, careful not to be noticed. Her path was long, weaving away from the polished neighborhoods into places he had never stepped. The air grew thicker, the streets narrower, the houses smaller, weathered by years of neglect. Here, people glanced at him with suspicion, as though his fine clothes did not belong. He felt out of place, but curiosity pulled him forward. The maid entered a small, crumbling building at the edge of the street. Its paint peeled, windows cracked, and the silence around it felt heavy. He waited outside, his chest tight with impatience, until finally the door creaked open again. She stepped out, not alone this time. Behind her came children. 5 of them, their clothes patched and shoes barely holding together. They clung to her like branches to a tree, their eyes wide, hungry, and yet filled with a fragile trust. She spoke softly to them, guiding them with a patience and love he had never seen in his own home. The man froze. Was this why she had been late? Was she caring for them in secret? But questions only deepened when he noticed something else. Her hands. They trembled as she adjusted the smallest child's jacket, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. She was stretched thin, carrying far more than anyone had realized. He followed again as she led the children through the streets, stopping at a small shop where she bought a loaf of bread with coins she counted twice before handing over. The shopkeeper barely acknowledged her, shoving the bread across the counter, without a smile. He noticed the looks, the kind he had seen but never paid attention to. The whispers, the stares, the way her presence was tolerated, not welcomed. Everywhere she went, the air around her seemed heavy with judgment, and yet she bore it silently, keeping her head high, never once letting the children feel her burden. Watching her, the man felt something stirring in him, a discomfort he didn't want to name. For the first time, he began to wonder if his rule of discipline had blinded him to something greater, something painful, unjust, and far more human than his ordered life had ever allowed him to see. The man's heart pounded as he followed the maid deeper into the crumbling building later that evening. He had expected to find carelessness, maybe a secret job, perhaps even dishonesty. But what he saw instead froze him in place. Inside the dimly lit room, the children sat quietly around a table, waiting with eager eyes as she divided the loaf of bread into uneven pieces. Her own plate remained empty. She smiled at them, hiding her hunger behind a mask of strength, urging them to eat more while she pretended she wasn't starving. The children giggled softly, their joy a fragile shield against the harshness of their world. But it wasn't just children. In the corner lay an elderly woman, frail and coughing, wrapped in blankets too thin for the cold. The maid knelt beside her, brushing a damp cloth over her forehead, whispering words of comfort. It became clear, this wasn't just her family. She was caring for neighbors, orphans, and anyone who had nowhere else to go. She had built a fragile refuge in the shadows of neglect, holding it together with nothing but her strength and sacrifice. The man felt his throat tighten. Every late arrival, every moment he had judged her as lazy, was now revealed for what it truly was. Survival. She hadn't been careless. She had been carrying a weight so heavy that he couldn't begin to imagine. As he stood there unseen, another realization cut deeper. The looks, the whispers, the cold treatment she faced. It wasn't just about poverty. It was about the color of her skin. In his world of privilege, she had always been invisible, reduced to her role, dismissed at the first sign of imperfection. And yet, here she was, embodying a strength greater than any rule or order he had ever demanded. For the first time in his life, the man felt shame, not just for firing her, but for the prejudice that had blinded him to her humanity. What he had uncovered was not a flaw in her, but a flaw in himself. The man stood frozen in the doorway, hidden in the shadows, unable to look away. The scene before him stripped away every layer of pride he had built his life upon. The maid he had dismissed as careless was not weak, not lazy. She was a pillar holding together lives that would otherwise crumble. Children who had no parents. An elderly soul no one cared for. A home patched together with love, sacrifice, and resilience stronger than any wealth could buy. On his way back to the mansion, silence pressed against him heavier than the night air. For years he had measured people by their efficiency, their punctuality, their usefulness to him. But what worth had his rules when compared to the quiet heroism he had just witnessed? His own house, polished and orderly, had never known such love, such courage. The boy's tearful face haunted him most. The child had seen her truth long before he ever did. While he valued discipline, the boy had valued compassion. And in the end, it was the boy who had been right. That night, sleep never came. His mind replayed the way society looked at her, the dismissive stares, the way even he had reduced her to a role rather than a human being. The prejudice ran deeper than his rules. It was a blindness he had carried his entire life. And for the first time, he realized it wasn't her who had failed him. It was he who had failed her. The next morning, the sun rose over a mansion that felt colder than ever before. He sat at the edge of his bed, the weight of guilt pressing against him, and asked himself the question that would not leave. How many more like her had he ignored? How many had been dismissed, judged, or broken by the very standards he thought were just? And perhaps the harder question, what would he do now that he finally knew the truth? Because once you've seen the humanity in someone you once overlooked, you cannot go back to blindness. You can only choose whether to change or continue in silence.